Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's seminar. We're delighted to have you in today's Center for Behavioral Analysis webinar, in which we will talk about the SPARC. I can see colleagues from around the globe joining us. It is a delight. I could go on and on talking about the countries. We have people from Iceland to Nepal, from New Zealand to Canada, the US, and of course, very, very dear and close colleagues from across Europe, from France, Spain, Greece, etc., from Peru. I know we have many families, parents joining us today, and it is an honor to have you all here, both families and professionals, colleagues and students. To give you a little bit of a history around the SPARC, it was our combined experience working with families of babies and toddlers what brought us the inspiration to get ideas on behavioral interventions together that could work for babies, that could work very, very early in life. We had observed in real life that our students who excelled, who did very, very well, who grew expanding their potential, were the ones who had very engaged families who knew how best to support them. And so it was clear for us that the earlier parents knew how best to support their child, the best the results would be, and the more positive the family dynamics and the mental health of everyone involved would be. So we felt that needed to be tested in research, and that's exactly what Dr. Amy Tanner did in her doctoral studies, and that resulted in developing the SPARC, a parental curriculum that can be used by parents, and it is a guide, it is a step-by-step process for which you do not need to have any background information because everything is explained in the book. It's aimed for babies between 6 and 18 months of age, but it can also be used with slightly younger babies, but also with older children, adjusting as needed some of the fun and engaging activities to match your child's age. And also it can be used by professionals who support children directly or who coach parents as a guide containing ideas of how to have fun while you expand your child's potential. So just in terms of the practicalities in this seminar, we have a chat box that you can find at the bottom of your screen. You can use that, it's called questions, to pose any questions you have. And some colleagues asked us whether you can pose questions in Spanish or French or Greek. I think there are a number of languages that we could, understand. So if you want to pose your questions in one of those 3 languages, please do so. We will respond all of the questions in English at the end of the webinar. So in about an hour, we will come back to that section, to the questions and answers section. In the meantime, enjoy. I'm passing on to my colleague, Amy Tanner.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for having me, and thank you for joining the presentation today. It's a super exciting day for Katerina and I. Not only are we doing the Behavior Live seminar today, we've also released the book today, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, but it is now available. So we're super excited for so much that's happening today. So I'll jump right into the SPARC. Just a quick little bit about me. As Katerina mentioned, I did my PhD studies under her supervision, as well as Dr. Carola Dillenberger at Queen's University in Belfast. I've been in private practice, working with young children with autism for about the last 15 years. I've presented research all over the world, in Japan and Sweden, France, Germany, Greece, UK, USA. I've worked across different continents, in France, Egypt, and Canada. And then over the last kind of 8 to 10 years, I've been specializing more in infants and toddlers, showing signs of autism and more proactive early intervention rather than reactive. And the SPARC was created as the original version is in my PhD thesis. And then we've developed to be even more parent friendly. And it took a few years to take it from that version of my thesis to being published today. So what we're going to talk a bit about is how the autism diagnosis goes with infant brain, what the earliest signs of autism are and why it's important to be learning how to identify those, why parent-mediated intervention is so important, especially with infants and toddlers, and then how that all aligns with the SPARC. We'll talk about all the components of the SPARC, how it's put together, and some research behind that. So in North America, and this might be similar in the UK as well, what we see is the average age of diagnosis is still about 4.5 years of age here. However, what we've seen is that symptoms and signs begin to emerge between 6 and 12 months. So when a child's quite young, but if you go to a doctor or pediatrician at that time, they're going to say they're way too young to diagnose anything, just wait and see. Come back when they're 18 to 20 months, and we'll see how they're doing then. So there's this critical year that passes where parents aren't given any tools, so they're just told to wait and see. They often come back, between 18 and 24 months, and they might first be referred for a hearing test if they're still seeing delays. That might take a few months to get an appointment, to get the results back. That might come back fine. Then they might be referred next to speech and language therapy. And then around 30 months to 36 months, it might be the speech and language pathologist that then nudges the parents towards perhaps you should consider looking at an autism diagnosis. So from when parents first might see signs as early as 6 to 12 months, it could be another few years before they're actually accessing services. So often the most critical time period of brain development, which is between 0 and 2 years of age, is spent looking for answers and waiting for services. And so my passion was, how do we utilize that time so it's not spent on wait lists? Autism services typically begin after a child receives a diagnosis. So that's often the way insurance is set up, funding is set up. So until there's a diagnosis, there's often no services available. And a diagnosis is given once a child meets a certain threshold of defining behavior. So not at the first signs, not at the earliest characteristics, but once kind of the full onset of the diagnosis has emerged. We know now that diagnosis is stable by 18 to 24 months, so it can be diagnosed reliably that young, and yet still the average age is, as I mentioned, kind of 4 to 4.5. So what if we could begin intervention at the first onset of the signs? And what impact would that have on a child's developmental trajectory and their outcomes? So let's look at what's happening in the infant brain during this time. So this is wild. A baby is born with 100 billion neurons. And so each of those neurons in the first 2 years is going to make about 20,000 neural connections. This translates to about 1 million neural connections every second. So kind of everything the baby's interacting with, touching, smelling, seeing, is creating new neural pathways. So neuroplasticity is the efficiency of these neural connections that are being created, they're being organized, they're being pruned. We'll talk a bit more about that, but the ones that aren't being used are being kind of pruned away for efficiency, and they're being modified and changed. And so these connections are built by genetics, plus they're shaped by our experience with the environment. So the more rich the environment can be with learning opportunities, the more salient and robust these neural connections can be. And what we've learned is that neural connections are formed more through active participation in your environment and exploration of the environment versus just exposure or observation. So if a child's just seeing something, but they're not actively participating, there's going to be a difference in the types of neural connections that are being formed. And so this is what it looks like inside the baby's brain as it's being going through these stages. So as a newborn, you'll see newborns have more sparse neural circuitry. So just the neural circuits are starting to make connections from all of those neurons. After a few months, you can see it's become much more dense. So the synaptic circuitry is going to change from more basic functions to more complex. And by 2 years, you can see it's quite dense. So we've built kind of this complex web of neural circuitry that's happening in the brain. And so we want to begin intervention as these connections are being formed. We don't want to wait for all these connections to be formed and then try to make changes and reorganization of anything. So what does it mean, active participation first? So doing before observation can enhance the brain activation. So if a child just is observing something, but they don't have the skills to do it themselves, they're not going to actually build the same neural connections compared to if they've experienced it. And then when they observe it, their brain's activating more. They've seen this as young as 3 months old. And they did this cool study. They put on sticky mitts on an infant, like a 3-month-old. And what they found is when they reached for something, the sticky mitt would allow them to grasp it. This taught them that their reach mattered, like a goal-oriented reach, and something happened for that. Then later, when they saw adults do that, their brain activated more, those mirror neurons, because they knew kind of what that action did. Whereas if they didn't put the sticky mittens on and the child, the 3-month-old, just watched an adult reach for something, their brain didn't activate nearly as much. So that being able to do it first is going to allow you to observe more and your brain to activate more when you see it later. This was seen again with 10-month-olds. So they would put a cloth over a toy, and the kids that were able to pull off the cloth and retrieve the toy, later when they observed a similar action by someone else, again, their brain activated more. The ones that weren't able to pull off the cloth, when they watched someone else do it, their brain didn't activate the same amount because it wasn't kind of as meaningful. They didn't know kind of the point of what that cloth was. So being able to teach through active participation is going to affect the way that they observe and the neural connections that they make through observation. Similar with a precision grasp, what they found is that infants only demonstrated an understanding of another person's grasp if they had mastered it themselves. And so motor skills were directly influenced the neural processing and the interpretation of others' behaviors. So when they could do things, they saw it in other people and had more activation. And I'll show you what that looks like in some brain scans. So up top, you've got the adult's brain, and down low, the child's brain. And so when child or adult are engaging in any action, you'll see the blue light up there. So you would imagine if you're participating in anything, your brain's going to be firing more. When you're just observing someone do something, you'll see the yellow. So in adults, we learn, or we can watch people and learn from that much better than children can, especially infants and babies. And so you can see how important it is to focus on really getting them to participate in their environment. And if we're not getting their attention, if we're just trying to show them things, but they're not really engaging in it, it's not doing as much as if they can actually be exploring it themselves. So neuroplasticity and intervention. So I like to think of all those neural circuits being built as if you were going into a city. So that brain architecture is like the transportation infrastructure system of your brain. So as all those neural connections are being formed, it's like putting in the metro of a city, putting in your super highways, putting in your service roads. And so the city's kind of being built from the ground up. And so you can imagine if you were a city planner, would it be easier to go into a city that hasn't been built yet and see, kind of have an overall plan of like, where are we going to put the roads, where are we going to put the metro, what's going to go there, compared to going into an already fully developed city, something like Houston or Detroit, and then trying to put a metro underneath or trying to reroute. It's going to take a lot more effort to make those changes. And that's similar to kind of neurocircuitry. And so when we say neuroplasticity, that's how easy we can move connections, how easy we can generate more. And as the child ages, they lose a bit of that neuroplasticity, and it's going to take kind of more time and more resources to make those changes. So intervention is going to be optimized when it begins while brain connections are being established versus already mature and atypical circuitry. as well as that intervention can alter that quality and quantity of self-generated experience with the environment. So by intervening early, that's going to change the way that they interact with the environment and create more of those self-generated experiences. So every month counts. So how early is early? There was a study done by McDonald et al. In 2014 that looked at how much does what month that you start intervention impact your outcomes. And what they found is it significantly does. So children that started intervention between 18 and 23 months, you'll see that's where the blue arrow is, of that cohort, 90% had significant changes in the first year. So 90% significantly responded to intervention. When they started just between 2 and 2.5, you'll see it dropped down to only 70% of children showed significant improvements to intervention. When it went just from 2.5 to 3, so 30 months to 36 months, that already dropped down to 34%. The children were still making gains. It's just what they qualified as significant gains. You can see that dropped year by year. Or sorry, not even year by year, month by month. So less than 2 years of age was the optimal time to begin to have the greatest impact. Optimal outcomes, another study, and the way that Pierce in 2016 looked at it was they were no longer meeting criteria for ASD. What they found, the biggest predictor of that were they were more likely to have begun intervention prior to age of 3. And then Eisenchuk and Zakor, they also found in one of their studies that the age at start of intervention was the key differentiator for best outcomes. So being able to start early was one of the best predictors of the overall trajectory. So just lowering the age of diagnosis. So if we're at the age of diagnosis of 4 or 5, just lowering that to 2 or 3, although that might be important, it might not substantially improve outcomes, because you see we really need to get to we need to really be starting about 18 months. So we have about 6 months before the age of 2. And so if we're not diagnosing till 3 or 4, we're still missing that critical year, even if we're bringing down the diagnostic age a year or 2. So to look at how do we do that, we really have to start before a diagnosis is given. So that would be proactive intervention or pre-diagnostic intervention or pre-symptomatic intervention. You'll hear kind of all of those used interchangeably. From Harvard, they looked at brain plasticity versus the physiological costs required to modify their neural connections. So you can see the months of the child's age along the bottom. So as the child ages from birth to, it's got 80 months there, you can see the green curve going up. So that's how much effort it's going to take to make changes to neural connections. And then the yellow line is the brain plasticity. So from birth to 20 months, you can see there's really high brain plasticity. And then you see kind of that intersection point where now the brain's changing at a slower rate, and it's going to take more time and effort to make changes. So we really want to capture kind of that birth to 30-month range. So our early years of life are seen as a window of opportunity and a point of vulnerability for several reasons. So most of the basic architecture supporting structural and functional organization of the brain is present by the second birthday, followed by slow-paced fine-tuning and reorganization of all the major circuits and networks thereafter. So we're really building that foundation 0 to 2. So if we know how important 0 to 2 is, in order to capture that time, we need to know what we're looking for. So what are the earliest signs of autism or developmental delays? How do we spot those in infancy so that we can begin right away at the earliest onset rather than waiting again for the full diagnosis? So when we talk about symptoms, or symptoms and signs across kind of any condition or disorder, sometimes things will present in a homogeneous manner onset. So what that means is that characteristics will appear in the same sequence and kind of the same severity of a condition or disorder. With autism, what's found is that it's a very heterogeneous onset. So that's a huge variation in what characteristics emerge, the sequence that they emerge, the severity that they emerge, the variety and timing of signs. So there's no single sign that's predictive every child might have their own different cluster of signs. They might have within those signs a great deal of variability of intensity. And so it's very difficult to try and find any single sign that's predictive. And that's why knowing kind of what screeners are available and kind of more of a breadth of signs rather than thinking about any one. So in 2015, Zwagenbaum and all, they put out, it wasn't a systematic literature review, but a literature review of all the early identification of autism signs and then recommendations based on what the earliest signs were. And so a few of the notable takeaways from their paper, as I just mentioned, researchers have not found a single behavioral sign or a single developmental trajectory that's predictive. So that really, again, just speaks to why we need screeners to really be looking at kind of cumulative risk indices, like a cumulative total or a threshold rather than any individual sign. There's substantial heterogeneity in the presentation. So it's unlikely that a single behavior will be found universally across all children as a defining marker. They did find that there was reduced levels of social attention and social communication, as well as increased repetitive behavior with objects as early markers. That might not be surprising. We see those in the diagnostic criteria. Some of the recommendations they had for future research was using more diverse samples. So a lot of the earliest research comes from looking at what's considered a high-risk sample or a high likelihood sample of kids. So they'll look at children that already have a sibling that's been diagnosed. We know their likelihood is much higher to also go on to get a diagnosis. So they're considered to have high likelihood of ASD. And so a lot of the research looks at that sample. And we know that that sample, even if they don't go on to get a diagnosis, they still might follow a different developmental trajectory than neurotypical development. So Katerina and I, or Dr. Denavi and I, we put out our own systematic review that built on this, that previous one. It went from January 2014 to May 31st, 2020. And we looked at what were the characteristics that had emerged already before 18 months in the children that did go on to get a diagnosis. So we were able to separate the children that were just considered high likelihood, but no ASD. So they had a sibling already diagnosed, or they had early signs present, but they did not go on to get a diagnosis. We took those out of the sample and just looked at the kids that did go on to get a diagnosis, what characteristics were emerging before 18 months. And so some of the takeaways from our study. So when you see HL, that means high likelihood of ASD. It means high likelihood. ASD means that they did go on to get the diagnosis. If you do see HL, no ASD, it means they had a high likelihood, but they did not get the diagnosis. So at 7 months, they saw reduced eye tracking and social referencing. So eye tracking, being able to follow an object across midline, across the room. It could be a person, it could be something that's passing in the room, as well as social referencing. So looking towards people sharing experiences. Deficits in initiating joint attention. So if something was surprising to them, to check in with someone to share the experience. Difficulty coordinating affect and gaze towards the end of the first year of life was already present. They demonstrated similar undifferentiated and lower levels of gaze across people. So what undifferentiated means is that across familiar people versus unfamiliar people, they looked less than neurotypical development, but they also didn't show kind of a familiar response to familiar people. So when they would scan the room, when you're working, when you're with, a neurotypical baby, you'll see them scan the room and notice their mom and make a smile. They'll see their mom versus a stranger, and they'll differentiate their facial expression, where they see a lot more undifferentiated and lower levels of gaze across those that go on to get a diagnosis. A huge predictor was infants who struggled to orient towards their name being called at 9 months of age were more likely to receive an autism diagnosis by 24 months. They showed lower rates of smiling and positive affect, so a lot more flatter affect, harder to laugh, harder to smile. was reported. Here's some videos of what reduced eye contact could look like. Peekaboo, 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 peekaboo. Hey, peekaboo. Look, hey. Peekaboo. Hey, peekaboo, 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 peekaboo. So you can see in that example, he was trying as hard as he could to kind of escape and look away. And when he couldn't anymore, he just shut his eyes. This boy in this video is 4 months old. And so you see the same behavior there as well. That even at 4 months with limited motor control of the neck, there's still great effort made to kind of escape eye contact or gaze. Here's responding to name, what that could look like, or not responding. Teen teen, teen teen, teen teen, teen teen, teen teen, teen teen, teen teen. So again, not responding to name by 9 months was seen as a big predictor by 2 years of age. Teen teen. So joint attention, so difficult, these were, again, characteristics that were found of a higher likelihood, or kids that did go on to receive a diagnosis. So difficulties coordinating joint attention and vocalizations at 14 and 18 months. Less frequent vocalizations and less complex vocalizations, so not babbling as much and not using as complex babbling and vocalizations by 14 months. Between 13 and 15 months, the children that did go on to get a diagnosis showed delays in using gestures and reduced joint attention. And 50% of those that did go on to receive a diagnosis failed to use any gestures between 13 and 15 months. There's delays, motor delays. So both those that the high likelihood that did go on to receive a diagnosis and the high likelihood that just had a sibling but did not receive a diagnosis, both showed motor delays in stationary tasks and object manipulation. They showed deficits in visual motor integration, such as goal-oriented reach, and failed the head tilt reflex more frequently than developmental delays groups starting at 9 months of age. I'm going to go through some of these other signs just a bit quicker. Restricted and repetitive behaviors. So motor stereotypy has greater predictive potential of ASD diagnosis than object stereotypy. The high likelihood autism group showed significantly more motor stereotypy at 12 months of age than both those that were high likelihood but did not get the diagnosis, as well as neurotypical developing. So motor stereotypy had greater predictive potential as an early sign. The number of parental concerns was another thing that we found, that it wasn't, again, any specific sign, but just parents of children that did later on go on to get a diagnosis, they had more concerns. So more concerns around sensory development, motor development, play, sleep, communication. So it was just a greater number of concerns. One thing that was super interesting that we found in our systematic literature review was that regression could be a predictor all on its own. So regression as its own early sign. So loss of social communication skills after 12 months of age was observed by 88% of the high likelihood, the children that already had a risk sample, whereas those that did not go on to get a diagnosis or neurotypical developing did not show any regression. So amongst the kids that did get a diagnosis, 88% actually was showing regression. Developmental regression refers to the loss of acquired skills that's not explained by other events. So up until more recently, regressive onset was believed to be like a rare occurrence. Part of that reason, there was a lack of a consistent operational definition or standardized measurement tool to actually capture what regression was. And so often it was just asked retrospectively, like, has your child lost any skills, rather than a standardized way to capture that. Regressive onset can be more difficult to capture by clinicians because oftentimes it's already occurred prior to the parent speaking out. So it may have happened and that may have caused the parent to go seek support from a pediatrician or a clinician. And so they've already kind of missed that window of regression. So as I mentioned, in this one study, 88% had shown losses in the first year of different social communication skills. And compared to the other groups that showed no loss in skills. So a review by Ozanov reiterate the point that regressive onset is now believed to be the rule rather than the exception. And so what they found is by changing the way that we look at regression, so before, rather than just asking retrospectively and categorically, such as, has your child lost any skills or has your child lost any words? So yes or no would be categorically, and retrospective looking back. If they measure it in real time, so prospectively using dimensional ratings, and then compare that intervals. So kind of on a scale from 1 to 5, how often does your child look? How often does your child smile? In different social communication measures. And when they compare those scales over time and over intervals, what they found is that a regression had occurred in more cases than they had originally thought could. But again, when asked reactively or retroactively and categorically if skills had been lost, only 30% had reported that regression had occurred. So we're only observing it 30% of the time when it's measured that way. When we can measure it prospectively and using dimensional ratings, we're seeing it in close to 90% of the sample. So skills across multiple visits using dimensional ratings may provide significant insight into a loss of skill, signaling a high probability of an autism diagnosis. Again, because we're only seeing regression in this one subset of children, those that go on to get a diagnosis, developing a better way to track regression could be a really good way to start identifying early indicators. Another thing that's very important for both parents and clinicians to know is that with out of the 19 studies that were included in our systematic literature review, 16 of them reported on behavioral deficits. So whether that's reduced eye contact, reduced gestures. And so what happens then is it's not that the child's not doing it at all, it's just that they're doing it less, they're doing it reduced, and that can be very difficult to spot. So if they're grasping an item, but doing that less. If they're looking at you, but they're just looking less. If they're babbling, but they're just babbling less, that can be very difficult to see as an early indicator compared to there are only 3 studies that looked at what's called excesses of behavior. So something kind of added on to the behavior. And that would be the stereotypy, the rigid and repetitive behavior or gastrointestinal symptoms that was observed in one paper. So that's another barrier of why it's so difficult to see those early signs. This. Future directions for looking at what the earliest signs are is in all of the papers, they weren't separated by gender, and we know that signs and characteristics look different in females versus males. In one of the papers that wasn't included in our systematic review because it didn't report on kind of the confirmation of a diagnosis, it did separate by gender with eye contact. And what it found is that females that did go on to get a diagnosis actually had greater social attention towards faces than males, and also more social attention than neurotypical development. So girls that later went on to get a diagnosis, oftentimes they were showing even more eye contact than neurotypical. So that could be a significant barrier to early diagnosis for females, is it's often a lack of social orienting and eye contact that trigger those parental concerns. But that's all the reason why, too, that we need to be looking at these early signs by gender, because we know the onset can be quite different. So if the most transformative time in brain development is between 0 and 2 years old, and signs of autism emerge anywhere from kind of 6 to 12 months, but the average age of diagnosis is still about 4.5, what can we do? So we want to involve the parents as early as we can. So parents that about 50% of all mothers of autistic children had elevated levels of depressive symptoms versus approximately only 8% of mothers with neurotypical children. Mothers of autistic children make 56% less than moms of neurotypical children because they tend to leave the workforce altogether or take lower paying jobs, not take the promotion, work fewer hours, work part-time, forego the promotions. Parents also tend to take less vacations, and it can be more difficult to find childcare and respite. So with this parental stress, it can cause this what's called a negative transactional cycle. So parents having, when a child begins to develop atypically, parents often will respond atypically. And what that, if they're, if you're trying to show your child books and they're always looking away, if you're trying to sing to them and they not respond, what happens then is you start to do those things less. So babies shape our behavior so quickly. If you were to hold, a 6-month-old baby and you make a funny face and it laughs, you'll do that face again. If you make a face or a sound and it doesn't respond, you try something else. If you do something and it's they're frightened by it, you don't do that again. So within seconds, that baby's changed what learning opportunities we present to them, which ones we stop doing, just based on how quick they respond. So if you think of that month over month, if a parent, every time they try to, engage with their child, there's not a response. What happens is they begin to do that less. They begin to, if they talk to their child, there's no response. They begin to vocalize less to their child. If they look at their child's never looking at them, they begin to look less. And over time, the child's presented with less learning opportunities, as well as the parents' self-efficacy, which is the belief in their ability and that they are an effective parent, begins to decrease. And that leads to kind of that greater depression, anxiety, and lower responsivity. And so that lower responsivity to their child's needs also creates less learning opportunities. So this creates this negative transactional cycle. Here's a video of parents that had just kind of come in to begin. And as you watch this, just look at kind of how much that they're looking at their child and how much they're vocalizing. Yes. All right, so you can see there that there is low kind of vocalization and struggling to engage, and that is because months of trying to engage and not having a response will actually shape their behavior. So by training parents to intervene early when it's developmentally appropriate, so we look at, a child that between 0 and 2, they should be spending most of their time with their parent. It wouldn't make sense for them to be going to therapy for, 10, 20, 30 hours a week. It's less financially burdensome. So as I mentioned, most services don't begin until a diagnosis is given. And so there's not a lot of intervention or support for pre-diagnosis kind of anything, but especially of autism. And so by training the parents, it reduces the amount that they need to have clinical intervention. It's going to lead to better generalization of skills because rather than it just happening while the child's with a therapist, we're training the parent so that it can be happening all day long. It can be happening in bath time and meal time, getting into the car seat, preparing diaper changes. So all across the day, they can be working on different social communication skills. It's going to lead to reduced anxiety and depression in parents because as they begin to feel that their behavior matters, that they're more that they're more effective at engaging with their child, they're going to become more responsive and present more learning opportunities. It allows for time-sensitive intervention. So as we talked so much about how critical that year is, if you're on a wait list for services, if you're trying to find someone that can work with you, you're kind of wasting month by month. And so by training the parents and having a tool that the parents can access right away, it will allow them to get timely intervention. And then it can alter their transactional cycle. So moving from that negative transactional cycle to a positive transactional cycle, so that when they engage with their child, they see their child learn the skill that causes them to be more responsive and present more learning opportunities, and they create a richer environment, leading to kind of that more active participation in the environment. So the child's building more neural connections rather than kind of that passive observation. So what is the SPARC? So the SPARC, right here, so it stands for the Sequential Parent Curriculum. So it's for parents that are concerned about their child's early development. It's a proactive alternative to the wait and see approach, which bridges the critical gap between your initial concerns and a formal diagnosis. So what can you do during that time when you've just been told to wait and see? The origin, as Katarina mentioned, it came out of my PhD research. There's a paper here that you can see for more information on just kind of what all the results were, what the outcomes were. There was a pilot study as well as a full study, and the curriculum that we used at the time is very similar. We've modified it slightly over time to become more parent-friendly. But we saw a gap that there was lots of emerging parent coaching models out there. But when I was looking through the research, I found that the papers and research failed to provide actionable steps for parents and clinicians. So I was seeing lots of, this method works, infants and toddlers are making great gains. You're like, great, what do I do? And there was still no information on, what they actually did. I would say, a parent coaching intervention or a video modeling intervention, but it didn't give you any information on like how you could replicate that with your own child. And so when parents are concerned with their infant's development, they need clear tools that are time sensitive. So they don't have time to take a course or go take a training or certification or find a research study and enroll their child. They want to begin something right away. And I wanted to create a tool, again, because there's no funding for pre-diagnostic intervention, what would be a low-cost tool to get parents information right away. So the SPARC's comprised of 12 sequential lessons. So each lesson builds on itself. I designed it with behavior skills training in mind. So we know behavior skills training is one of the best ways to teach parents, and that's how my PhD research was done. So we'd have the 4 components. We'd have the instruction first and the why behind it. So this is what we're going to do this week. This is why it's important. And then we would have modeling. So I would demonstrate the lesson, break it down step by step of what to do. And then they would have rehearsal where the parents would get to practice, and then there would be feedback. And so although it's created in a book form and we're not able to comprehensively do those components, we've put those sections in so that there is troubleshooting, there's a way to get feedback, there's a way to extend and receive kind of coaching in the moment. And I'll go over what that looks like. So it's an explicit program of action. And so it's going to tell parents step by step what to do. And the way I like to think of this is when there's a lot of other development books out there that will give different games, different activities, different suggestions of what you can do with your child, but they don't give the dosage, like how much you should do it, what it looks like when they've mastered it. So you get maybe like a variety of 20 different activities, but it's hard to know where to start. And I think of it as, if you were to begin just working out at a gym, and you knew nothing about working out, and someone gave you a textbook of every type of workout activity that you could do, every type of machine. Sure, it's all the information, but you don't know how to sequence it, what muscle groups you should be doing, what number of sets and reps you should be doing, what weight you should be doing, and when do you move on and when do you move up. So it's a whole bunch of information, but without kind of a distilled version, it can just be overwhelming. They try a little bit of everything, but they might not see progress. So this is one lesson at a time. There's a clear mastery criteria that will help parents lead them through, and then each lesson will build on the previous one. In addition to the 12 lessons, we've also created a milestone map. And so the milestone map is a developmental tracking tool. Actually, I'll show it in a second on the slides. And what we wanted to change with what's currently out there, because there's a bunch of great developmental milestone maps out there, or checklists. We moved it to 2-month intervals rather than 3-month intervals to allow for more sensitive tracking. So rather than, between 6 and 9 months, this should emerge. We've got 6 to 8 months and 8 to 10 months. So you see more milestones and what months they should be emerging in. We used a combination of 6 other tools plus our own clinical expertise on what were some of the more important milestones that can often be missed that we're seeing in our clinical practice. And then we change it so that skills are visually tracked across the domain rather than across the age interval. So this will allow you to see that if the child's missing any prerequisite skills from a previous age interval, and then anticipate what's coming next, as well as allow for the ability to better spot any regression of skills. So in the SPARC, this is what you'll see this across 5 different domains. So this is our milestone map. So again, it's all the social skills from 2 to 24 months and where they should emerge, so that you can say your child's 8 months old. You can look previous really easy of what they should have intact, and also what's coming up next, what to be watching out for emerging, rather than just looking at 6 to 8 months of social, communication, motor, physical altogether. There might be things missing from before and after that wouldn't be as easily visible. So that's also in our in the SPARC. And then the components, so each of the 12 lessons, again, around kind of that behavior skills framework, it's going to start out with the skill spotlight. So why is this lesson important? What is this lesson? Then a step-by-step procedure. This is a little sneak peek from inside the book. So this is the skill spotlight, so why it's important. And then the step-by-step procedure. So we really walk parents through each step and give examples of what it can look like. Overcoming obstacles, so that troubleshooting. So, okay, I've followed this step by step. It's still not working. What else can I do? A quick reference so that they've got the step by step, but then they can also tear out this page so that when they're playing with their child, they have something quick to reference. They don't have to be opening a book and trying to find out a reference back. And our data collection. So for every lesson, there's an acquisition goal, a fluency goal, and a generalization goal. So the acquisition is just learning whatever the skill is. The fluency, being able to show it and demonstrate it, multiple times. And then the generalization, being able to do it across different stimuli, different people, different environments. And it'll be very explicit on what is for each goal. This is just one chapter here, and then we'll move on to the second. So every lesson has that. So parents kind of know where they should be at before moving on to the next lesson to make sure that the child has developed those skills. And then I'll show you some samples of different lessons and what we're learning in different lessons. So the child that we watched in a few slides back, when I was talking about the negative transactional cycle. So how the parents began to look less and speak less after, this is after lesson 2, so being able to teach them how to follow their child's lead, narrating the play, so creating more vocalizations, more meaningful vocalizations, as well as learning how to add value as a play partner. So making sure that when we're joining their play, we're adding value rather than demand. If we're finding the child's always escaping us, we need to relook at how can we be adding value to their play so that it's reinforcing to play with us rather than punishing. So here you can see with just 2 sessions of a change in the mother's behavior.
Bubbles. Bubbles. 1, 2, 3. Hey. That one. That one. That one. Open. That. What's this one? 2, 3, 4. Look at it. Okay.
So you can see there, she's doing a better job being able to engage with her child. She's making more meaningful vocalizations. She's learning how to position items to capture a child's attention, and really also following the child's lead. So when she tried to engage the child with bubbles and he looked away and started going, rather than trying to get the child back and be like, look, bubbles, come, she just looks at where he's going and how do I make more meaningful learning opportunities where he's at. In lesson 4, we teach about what's called reaching to request. So even when we know what a child wants, rather than just giving it to them, the more communication opportunities that we can present. So making choices. So you'll see that mother do that again.
And which one you want? Which one? This? Front? Yeah.
So again, the child was about to reach for the marker rather than just giving it to him, creating an opportunity. Then he's got to scan. He actually picked a different one, but that creates another opportunity for communication. I'm doing the same. This girl here is maybe 8 months old at the time.
Ball. Yeah, roll. Roll. Roll.
So even as young, we've seen it as young as 6 months, we can begin incorporating it. But by 8 months, you can see that a child's able to make a choice between 2 items. Had I just handed her the ball, it removes that learning opportunity.
Ball.
And similar here.
Which one? Which one? Oh, you want the lid, okay. Which one? There you go.
So again, just embedding more opportunities for communication. So that's our lesson 4. Then we begin to work on imitation by lesson 6. So again, teaching parents how to, why imitation is important, first of all, different ways to teach imitation, how to prompt imitation, and then what it can look like, as well as how to measure it.
Bang, 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 bang. Bang, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. Hop, hop, hop. Hop, hop, hop. Bang, bang. Bang, bang. I'm going to put it. In. 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 Bang, bang, bang.
By lesson 11, we're looking at how to increase vocalizations. So by pairing it with something preferred that they can have a high frequency of requests.
1, 2, 3. On. 1, 2, 3. On. 1, 2, 3. On. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. On. 1, 2, 3. Off. 1, 2.
So in the lesson, again, it will give parents lots of different examples and things they can try, but also the theory behind on the principles and how to teach the skill so that they can do very idiosyncratic things for their child or very nuanced things. So this light was a great example of something that wasn't directly from the lesson, but that the child did really well.
1, 2, 3.
And then at the end, our lesson 12 is called the Symphony of Skills. So putting it all together. So creating lots of learning opportunities, all embedded and being able to work through many of the skills. This child's a bit older. She was the one that we saw with the imitation early on. So I've been working with her since she was about 8 or 9 months. And this is her just after 2. And here you can see I've put 10 learning opportunities into a 40-second clip. So again, I know she wants this kind of blowhorn rather than just giving it to her. I've created 10 different communication opportunities very quickly so that it kind of encourages the communication.
Okay, there you go. Okay. Should we open? Open? Okay. You're welcome. Ready? Set. Okay. Do you want green or red? Which one? Green. Ready? Want to try and blow?
So as this chapter by chapter, as everything builds on, we do a halfway review so parents can learn to work on just embedding the first 6 lessons before getting all the way to 12. And then just making it as natural as possible in through play, right? So when you look at how, if you do this all day long, or through different opportunities, the child's going to have so many more opportunities for communication than when without that training. When we're just predicting their needs, we're like, okay, they need food, they need an orange, they want their TV on. The child can probably go many hours without needing to communicate because the parents are so good at, predicting what their child needs. So we want to really train the parents to see all these different communication opportunities along the way.
Okay, there you go.
This is at the end of the 12 months or at the end of the 12 lessons.
Oh, there's a big ball. Shoot! He scores! Yay! He shoots. He scores! Yay! Oh. Big ball. He shoots. He scores! Yay!
As you can see, this was the baby from 4 months when the mother was holding it, and it was doing everything it could not to look. You can see how natural the social referencing is now, where after he throws the ball in, he's looking to his mom to see if she sees it. He's imitating clapping. There's a lot of positive affect. He's smiling and checking in quite a bit. They're just a progression from that little guy from a lot of the videos that you've seen. I've kept in touch, and he's gone on to, play high-level hockey, and he just does extremely well in school. And so by kind of capturing kind of those very, very early, starting before 2, the trajectory that you see and that we've seen with all our kids is just incredible.
I'm going to say to Amy.
So some takeaways. So first, learning to identify those early signs can allow us to intervene at the first onset of the signs. Just focusing on decreasing the age of diagnosis is not enough. It's unlikely that we're going to go from the average age of diagnosis 4.5 to 1 year old anytime soon. And so not worrying as much on that as focusing more on how to identify the early signs, and then what can we do at the first onset of the early signs. We want to make sure that critical period in brain development is not wasted on wait lists or waiting for services or before a diagnosis can even be made. Really focusing on that proactive versus reactive intervention. So thinking about that city being built or the brain being built from that ground up. So being proactive and how we can embed communication opportunities and enrich cognitive skills and enrich the environment rather than react once all those neural pathways are set in place. We talked about all the benefits of incorporating parents. So changing that transactional cycle from a negative transactional cycle to a positive transactional cycle can reduce the stress, improve responsivity, and increase the amount of learning opportunities that are going to be presented to the child. And then the earlier intervention is going to maximize treatment outcomes. So by focusing on that 1 year, you're going to get way more kind of bang for your buck than any other year in that life and across the lifespan. And so we really want to focus on, intervention prior to 2 years of age. The SPARC is now available on Amazon. So looks like this. You're going to get a whole bunch of introduction information, a lot of similar things that I talked about with brain development, child development, that milestone checklist or milestone map, as well as the 12 sequential lessons. It is written for parents, so it's written to be used in the most parent-friendly language and very plain language. But as a clinician, it would be a great tool where you can support parents with that and still follow the sequence and the curriculum if you are working with children under the age of 2. My research focused on kids between 6 and 18 months. So that's what we've put on the book. But as Katarina mentioned, you could start, a month or 2 earlier, as well as children that are showing more significant delays. And if you are just on a wait list and looking for a tool, you could definitely use it with children that are 2 or 2.5. I've got a upcoming training for clinicians that will happen on May 15th, and it will be more of a deep dive into the first 6 lessons on how to teach them, what do they look like, and breaking them down for clinicians. So going beyond just the manual to learn how to effectively guide and empower families in the intervention. So tips with parent coaching and how to, if you're going to use this with parent coaching, how to effectively implement the SPARC in your own practice. If you're interested in that, the event's on Eventbrite. You can find it. If you reach out to me or email me. I can send you the link. On my website, there's a place to sign up for a newsletter, and I will also send it out through there. And so we'll open it up to any questions right now around the SPARC, the presentation, anything for Katarina or myself.
So Amy, I will start with the list of questions. First of all, thank you for posting so many questions. Clearly, I see people are thinking really hard on the information that you have provided and how they can best use it in their work. So one question is, can clinicians use the SPARC to train parents? Absolutely, right? I think you've just responded that question. By reading the SPARC, you will have concrete goals to work on and specific ideas on what activities you can use with babies and toddlers. And there is a tracker that you can use to monitor progress. So yeah, absolutely, you can use it with children when working with children directly, or with your own child, or as you coach parents. So another question, Amy, for you. So some colleagues are asking, some researchers and professionals in the field are asking, was it difficult to get participants for your studies, or was it easy? How was it?
It wasn't that difficult because, as we talked about, the high likelihood of a sibling going on to receive the diagnosis. So a lot of the infants that I've worked with have an older sibling, which kind of made parents more aware of the earlier signs. So that was one way. And then what I found too is that parents that didn't have an older sibling that were already diagnosed but saw the early signs, they were very motivated to find any tools. And so I still get contacted from people kind of all over the world where they're like, I have a 6-month-old. I've been researching and Googling, like crazy. I found your name. And so parents that see those early signs, that notice them so early, I find them to be highly motivated, which is also part of, I think, why the intervention has worked so well with the parents, is because they have sought me out, meaning they're so motivated. And so they're more motivated to, implement the intervention. I'm based out of Vancouver, Canada, and work closely with a few pediatricians that do developmental assessments and diagnosis. They were able to refer a few families. So I didn't find it difficult, but there's so many families I have worked with where it is their second child, and they're like, I wish I knew all these things for my first child, because they see the difference it has made in the second child's development.
Sure. And I think our experience from conducting studies in other countries, so in Italy, for example, through the doctoral work of other students at Queen's University, and also through our clinical experience in Greece, Spain, or France, normally parents worry first. They know their child really well, and very, very often they are the first person who notices that there might be a developmental delay. And during that wait and see period, they get stressed. They need the tools to be able to know what to do. So finding the right expert is most of the times a relief. That's, I think our clinical experts would say that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so another question for you, Amy, is, does intensity change as children get older? Would we recommend a different intensity, or how would that dose change across the years?
Yeah, so it really depends on kind of the parent's availability for that intensity. And I've found there's quite a range in, when it's a stay-at-home mom and maybe it's her first child, she has the ability to really implement that across many different aspects of the day. When you have two full-time working parents, and maybe the child's in daycare most of that time, they're going to have less time. So the intensity, even just with the parent intermediate, it's really hard to track of how much time they're dedicating throughout the week. But I find between 0 and 2, everything's can be embedded all day long. After 2, I would, if you're not seeing kind of them catching up to regular milestones, I would look to really increase the intensity as well. If you have access to more intervention, you can balance it between parent-mediated as well as therapist-led intervention, incorporate different domains such as speech and language and occupational therapy as well for more comprehensive intervention. But every child's so unique. So I'd really look at as well, what do they need, to address the concerns that you're seeing. With some kids, they can be very much addressed during more play-based activities. Some might need a lot more kind of explicit intensive training.
Thank you. And so another question related to the last one is, in those studies that were included in our systematic review, you discussed some of those studies in your presentation. Was the intensity specified for those kids who had the optimal outcomes?
For like those 3 at the beginning, the McDonald et al., it was like community, I'm trying to remember exactly. But those ones were more focused on less about the intensity and more just the time of start being the biggest predictor. They did compare a few different types, like community-led. I forget that. I think there's 3 different conditions. But what they found is that the type actually didn't matter as much as the time that they started. So they didn't see as much difference between the 3 different types as much compared to just starting before 2, whatever type it was, they saw a bigger change, if I can recall correctly.
Yeah. I think this is a very, very important takeaway message. And if I can add to that, in Amy's presentation, there are different references to specific studies. One of the most recent studies conducted by Green and colleagues just a year ago, the authors there talk about a minimum of 15 hours a week. But then systematic reviews have pointed out to studies being heterogeneous. So some studies having parents hold 2 sessions per day, and every session lasting 1 to 2 hours. And other studies talking about 2 sessions a week, or a few sessions a month. So there's a big variability across studies at the moment. And at the same time, there are not so many studies with infants. And that leads us to the following question, which
I'll
is...
just add a bit something onto that as well. So with the SPARC, what we've tried to do is really maximize like quality over quantity. And so for parents, if for 15 minutes twice a day, you can highly focus on this, then you're more likely to learn the skill and then be able to generalize it in other places. And so it's really hard to say, because you might say, oh, 30 minutes a day, that's not enough time. But that's more of kind of the more intensive practice, but then you're implementing it at mealtime and bath time and in the car seat and in bedtime. And so it's actually happening across all the day, but it's hard to capture how much time that actually is.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because when parents know how to present fun, engaging activities, then they just do it at every opportunity in a natural way, right?
Right.
So it's getting those skills established in the first place, and then it will just flow naturally in everything that you do as a parent or a clinician with your child. So some colleagues are asking, they're saying, I'm working with babies and sometimes I struggle with finding goals or with having specific ideas on activities to implement, especially for very young babies. Will the SPARC help me? And again, I think that's clear.
I think every lesson, like first we highlighted what are kind of those critical pivotal skills that they should learn. And then within each lesson, there's probably at least 5 different examples that are pretty step-by-step of what game, like how to do this with bubbles, how to do this with cars, how to do this with blocks. So even within each lesson, you're going to have many different examples of how to, different ways that you can generalize this activity. So I think, yes, it will definitely give you some guidance on what are the kind of critical skills to focus on and what does mastery criteria look like that young? Like, how do you know when to move on to your next skill? So it should definitely help you.
Okay, so another question is, do we feel that there is still a large gap in infant research? I would say definitely. What's your view, Amy?
Absolutely. I think it's still a very new part of the research. I think where it's stemmed from is, 80s, 90s, early 2000s, we really saw tons of research come out about how important early intervention was, the outcomes for that. And with that, what we got is an earlier diagnosis. So we're seeing more kids being diagnosed at 2, even younger than 2, but we didn't have, okay, they're being diagnosed this young, but what do we do with them? We know that like probably what works for, a 4 or 5-year-old is probably not the same way that we want to approach intervention with a 2-year-old or younger. And so with kind of, the onset of more research around intervention, bringing down the diagnostic age, we're seeing younger kids getting diagnosed, which is pushing more research on, okay, now what are best practices for these young kids? But then also too, as well, as I mentioned many times in the presentation, anything pre-diagnosis oftentimes doesn't come with funding. So parents are limited. And so with that, there's less practical research probably being done compared to research that there's funding for.
Okay, so adding to that last question about the research gaps, one clear research gap, and I see some colleagues are asking that specific question from countries other than the US or the UK or Australia. So a large gap lies in testing the impact of a parent-coached intervention or a parent-mediated intervention in a country or in a culture that is different than the Anglo-Saxon cultures. So that's definitely a large gap. To see whether there are cultural differences even in the activities or in who are the key people involved? Is it just, the parents? Is it the extended family? So there are questions around that. And another very large gap, an important one, is what is the long-term impact? So because the data we have been collected recently, in the recent years, in the last decade, and especially in the last 5 to 7 years, we still need to see how those kids continue growing and having success, and what's their life pathway after very, very early life intervention. Okay, another question is a practical one. So you're asking us, the book is only available in English at the moment. Do we aim to have it translated in other languages? And specifically, I can see some students and all colleagues of ours are asking who speak Spanish. I can definitely say Spanish is a priority for us, but at the moment it's only available in English.
Yeah. And I would say Spanish, French, and Mandarin are probably all in the not too distant future.
Yeah, exactly. Again, another practical question. So you're asking us, will the presentation be available afterwards? How can you access that information, or how can you read more? So today's video will be available for you to view at a later date. It will be available through a permanent link on the Centre for Behaviour Analysis resources webpage at Queen's University Belfast. So same as for all of our seminars. Again, we have another seminar next week, and we have about one seminar every month or 2 months. You can find the videos of those seminars on our webpage. Again, the Centre for Behaviour Analysis resources page. Okay, I think there's just one last question at the moment. Can the SPARC be utilized with older children? And what would be the maximum age that it would be relevant or useful as a guide?
It hasn't been tested with older. My research was focused on 6 to 18 months. I would say three and a half, I would use these skills. After that, I would probably alter my approach quite a bit. What about you, Katarina?
Yes, I fully agree. There are some fun activities, engaging activities that you can use with older children, and they will still work. They will be relevant. They will be interesting for the children. However, as the child you're working with is getting older, you would need larger and larger adaptations to those activities. So the skills or the skill set that the parents will acquire will remain the same. So learning how to reinforce pivotal behaviors, this will serve you independently of the child's age. However, the ideas that are in the book have been designed with babies and toddlers in mind. So you will need to do some hard work to get ideas that are adapted to the child's age. If you go beyond, as Amy said, 3 years and a half. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, I think that's all our questions answered. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. As Amy said, the SPARC is now available on Amazon. Our emails, again, you can find them on Queen's University Belfast website. You can email Amy or me for any specific questions. And the studies that Amy mentioned, they are published and they are free. So they are open access, so you can read them online. And we hope to see you very soon in some of our upcoming seminars. So thank you very much for attending, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.